Mom, why is she here? Ryan Carter's voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to stop 3 conversations at once. Emily Whitmore looked up from the clasp of Margaret Carter's pearl necklace, her fingers still resting lightly behind the older woman's neck. For one suspended second, nobody in the dining room moved. 40 years of marriage were being celebrated beneath warm amber lights, surrounded by white roses, framed family photographs, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. And standing in the middle of it all was the woman Ryan had divorced 3 years ago. Margaret glanced at her son as though his question were far stranger than Emily's presence. Because I invited her. Ryan's jaw tightened. Emily lowered her hands and stepped back. There. Perfect. Margaret touched the pearls and smiled at her through the mirror. Thank you, sweetheart. Sweetheart. Ryan heard it. Emily knew he heard it. She picked up her champagne before the silence could become heavier. Happy anniversary, Ryan. Emily. His tuxedo fit him differently now. Or perhaps she simply no longer remembered the shape of him accurately. 3 years could do that. It could turn someone whose footsteps you once recognized from another room into a man standing 10 feet away, familiar in all the wrong places. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe some bonds survive even after love changes, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Emily's story. Luke Carter appeared from the hallway carrying a tray of appetizers. He saw Ryan, then Emily, then their mother between them. Oh good, you're both here. Ryan stared at him. You knew? Luke stopped. Knew what? That Emily was coming. Luke's expression softened with the exhausted patience of a younger brother who had apparently inherited a problem nobody else considered a problem. Ryan, she's been coming to Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner for 12 years. We've been divorced for 3. I know how calendars work. Emily nearly smiled. Nearly. Ryan caught it. For a brief moment, something old passed between them. The shared instinct to laugh when Luke became impossible. Then Emily looked. Away first. Margaret crossed the room and adjusted Ryan's tie exactly as she had when he was 16. Tonight is about your father and me. I love my son. I love Emily. I refuse to spend my 40th anniversary pretending one of you stopped existing because your marriage ended. Ryan exhaled slowly. Across the room, his father raised his glass toward Emily. You still drinking that terrible dry champagne? Still pretending your bourbon tastes good? She called back. He laughed. Ryan didn't. He simply watched as Emily moved through his parents' home without hesitation, greeting relatives, straightening a crooked photograph, knowing which kitchen drawer held the extra napkins. She wasn't behaving like a guest. That was what unsettled him. 3 years ago, Ryan had believed divorce meant dividing everything cleanly. 2 apartments, 2 futures, 2 separate families. But as Emily took the seat beside his mother at the dinner table, Ryan noticed a place card waiting across from her. His name was written on it. Margaret pulled out her chair. Sit down, Ryan. He looked at Emily. Emily looked back. Neither moved. Margaret sighed. For heaven's sake. You managed 11 years of marriage. Surely you can survive one dinner. And somewhere around the table, someone quietly laughed. The divorce ended their marriage on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, both families had already decided it changed almost nothing. 11 years earlier, Emily Whitmore had first entered the Carter house carrying a grocery store apple pie and enough nervousness to make her forget Ryan's mother's name at the door. Margaret had taken one look at the pie, smiled, and whispered, Tell me you didn't bake that. Emily blinked. I didn't. Good. We'll get along. They did. Slowly, then completely. Emily learned Margaret's Thanksgiving stuffing recipe and discovered that Ryan's father, Thomas, cheated shamelessly at cards. Luke began calling her when he needed advice he didn't want from his brother. Christmas mornings became crowded with wrapping paper and coffee. Summer weekends meant both families squeezed around the same backyard table while Ryan argued baseball with Emily's father, Daniel. Somewhere along the way, nobody remembered which traditions belonged to which family anymore. When Emily and Ryan married, their parents didn't simply exchange polite holiday cards. They became friends. Margaret and Emily's mother, Susan, took weekend shopping trips together. Daniel helped Ryan repair his first house. Thomas attended Emily's father's retirement party and stayed until midnight. There were photographs everywhere. Beach vacations, birthdays, graduations, Christmas dinners. Emily and Ryan appeared in most of them, but never alone. Their marriage had built a bridge, and everyone they loved had crossed it. Years later, when that marriage began collapsing, Emily assumed the bridge would collapse with it. The divorce itself was quiet. No courtroom battle. No screaming in parking lots. Just two exhausted people sitting across from attorneys beneath fluorescent lights, signing their names beneath decisions they had postponed for too long. Emily stared at the final page before writing Emily Whitmore instead of Emily Carter. Her hand paused after the first letter. 11 years of signing one name had created muscle memory. She finished slowly. Ryan noticed. He said nothing. Outside the building, they stood beneath a gray October sky. "I guess that's it," Ryan said. Emily pulled her coat tighter. "I guess so." They walked in opposite directions. Emily believed that was what divorce meant. Separate roads. Separate holidays. Separate families. 3 days later, her phone rang. Margaret. Emily stared at the screen until the final ring, then answered. "Hi. Sunday dinner is at 6. Emily closed her eyes. "Margaret, I'm making pot roast. You know Ryan and I are divorced." A pause. "Yes, Emily. I was there. Then you understand why I probably shouldn't come." Margaret's voice softened. "You divorced my son. You didn't divorce me." Emily had no answer. Thanksgiving arrived 6 weeks later. She planned to spend it quietly with her parents. Then Susan placed an extra casserole in the car. "What's that?" Emily asked. "Margaret likes my sweet potatoes." Emily stared at her mother. "Mom." Susan shrugged. "Your divorce doesn't mean I suddenly dislike the woman." That afternoon, Emily walked into her parents' living room and found Thomas Carter laughing beside Daniel with 2 glasses of bourbon between them. Ryan wasn't there, but his family was. Emily stood in the doorway, coat still buttoned, and understood something neither divorce attorney had warned her about. She and Ryan had separated their bank accounts, their furniture, their photographs, and their future. But they had spent 11 years teaching 2 families how to love each other. And apparently, nobody had agreed to stop. The rule was simple. If Emily was coming, Ryan wouldn't. And if Ryan was coming, Emily would stay away. It worked perfectly until their families decided they were tired of obeying it. The arrangement began after their first disastrous Christmas apart. Emily had arrived at Susan and Daniel Whitmore's house, carrying wine, and found Ryan's coat hanging beside the door. She recognized it before she saw him. Dark wool, frayed stitching near the left pocket. Her stomach tightened with an instinct her heart had not yet learned to forget. Ryan appeared from the kitchen holding 2 beers. "Emily." "Ryan." Daniel stepped between them with the expression of a man realizing too late that he had invited 2 thunderstorms to dinner. "I thought Susan told you." Emily looked at her mother. Susan suddenly became fascinated by the Christmas tree. After that, Emily called Margaret before Carter family gatherings. Ryan checked with Daniel before visiting the Whitmores. Birthdays became schedules. Holidays became negotiations. Their families learned phrases like, "He'll be there Saturday, so maybe come Sunday," and "Emily's staying for dinner, but Ryan can stop by afterward." For nearly a year, it worked. Then Margaret rebelled. Thanksgiving afternoon, Emily arrived at the Carter house, carrying Susan's sweet potato casserole. She pushed open the kitchen door with her shoulder. "Margaret, where do you want?" She stopped. Ryan stood at the counter carving the turkey. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. The knife froze halfway through a slice. "You've got to be kidding me." Emily slowly lowered the casserole. "She told me you weren't coming." "Dad told me you. We're spending Thanksgiving with your parents." Both turned toward the doorway. Margaret stood there holding a bowl of green beans. She didn't look remotely guilty. "Mom." Ryan set down the knife. "What? You knew?" "Yes." Emily stared at her. "Why?" Margaret placed the bowl on the table with extraordinary calm. "Because I'm 71 years old, and I'm done making seating charts around your divorce." Silence. From the living room came football commentary and Thomas laughing at something Daniel had said. Emily blinked. "My father is here too?" "Of course." Margaret looked genuinely confused. Who else was going to bring the bourbon? Ryan rubbed a hand over his face. "Mom, we had an agreement." "No. You two had an agreement. The rest of us were apparently assigned supporting roles without being consulted." Emily looked down, hiding the beginning of a smile. Ryan saw it. "You think this is funny?" "A little." "Great. You always hated complicated schedules." "I hate this schedule." Margaret pointed toward the dining room. "Then stop having one." Dinner was awkward. Painfully so. Emily sat between Luke and Susan. Ryan sat across from her. Every few minutes their eyes met over mashed potatoes, wine glasses, or someone passing gravy. Yet something stranger happened beneath the discomfort. When Emily reached for coffee, Ryan automatically slid the cream toward her before she asked. When Ryan began searching for hot sauce, Emily pointed toward the cabinet without looking up. Neither thanked the other. Neither needed to. 11 years had left small maps inside them. After dinner, Emily stood alone at the kitchen sink rinsing plates when Ryan entered carrying glasses. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. Emily looked at him. "I know." For once, they agreed completely. What neither understood was that their families had already reached the opposite conclusion. They were finished choosing between Ryan and Emily. And soon, one late-night phone call would make avoiding each other impossible. At 1:17 in the morning, Ryan discovered that when his mother was afraid, the first person she called was the woman he had divorced. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Ryan pushed through the emergency department doors with his coat half-buttoned, his pulse still racing from his father's midnight call. Margaret had collapsed at home. Thomas had said she was conscious. Stable. The doctors were running tests. Ryan repeated those words inside his head as he hurried toward the waiting area. Then he stopped. Emily sat beneath the fluorescent lights wearing plaid pajama pants beneath a long camel coat. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, and one hand held a paper cup she clearly hadn't touched. Thomas sat beside her. Emily's hand rested over his. Ryan stared. "Emily." She stood immediately. "She's okay." "What happened?" "She got dizzy coming down the stairs. Your dad caught her before she fell." Ryan looked toward Thomas. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" "I did call you." "Then why is she already here?" The question came sharper than Ryan intended. Emily's hand dropped from Thomas's. Ryan regretted the tone almost immediately. "Who called you?" he asked. Thomas looked at his son for a long moment. "Your mother." Ryan said nothing. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Emily looked toward the closed treatment room doors. "She called me from the ambulance." "Why?" Emily's expression shifted. Not anger. Something quieter. "Because she was scared." The answer landed harder than Ryan expected. A nurse appeared and told them Margaret would be fine. Dehydration, exhaustion, nothing immediately dangerous, but they wanted to observe her for several hours. Thomas exhaled so deeply his shoulders seemed to collapse. Emily squeezed his arm. Ryan watched the gesture. Natural. Familiar. Unperformed. 20 minutes later, Margaret was allowed one visitor at a time. Thomas went first. Ryan sat across from Emily in the waiting room. Between them stood a vending machine buzzing in the darkness. "You didn't have to come," he said. Emily looked at him. "I know. It's 1 in the morning. I know what time it is, Ryan." He glanced at her pajama pants. Apparently. She looked down and, despite herself, laughed. Quietly. Ryan almost did too. Then the silence returned. "Does she call you often?" he asked. Emily turned. The coffee cup slowly between her hands. "Sometimes." "How often is sometimes?" "Enough." Ryan looked away. 3 years. 3 years of imagining Emily had cleanly exited his family while he carefully navigated hers from a distance. Yet his mother still called her when recipes went wrong, when Luke forgot birthdays, when Thomas refused to see a doctor, and apparently when an ambulance frightened her at midnight. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily's eyes lifted. "What was I supposed to say?" "Hi, Ryan. Just so you know, your mother still loves me?" He flinched. Emily softened. "I almost stopped answering after the divorce." "Why didn't you?" She looked toward Margaret's room. "Because losing you was part of the divorce." Her voice lowered. "Losing her wasn't something I agreed to." Ryan had no response. For years, he had assumed Emily's place in his family existed because she had been his wife. Sitting beneath the cold hospital lights, he finally saw the truth. Margaret hadn't kept Emily because she belonged to Ryan. She had kept Emily because, somewhere over 11 years, Emily had become someone Margaret loved for herself. The treatment room door opened. Thomas stepped out. "She wants Ryan." Ryan stood, then paused beside Emily. "You'll stay?" The question surprised both of them. Emily looked up at him. "If she wants me to." Ryan nodded. "She does." Then he walked toward his mother's room, carrying with him the first uncomfortable realization that perhaps the divorce had separated far less than he thought. The first honest conversation of their divorce happened over hospital coffee neither of them wanted. By 4 in the morning, Margaret was sleeping comfortably under observation. Thomas had dozed off in a chair beside her, and the hospital had settled into that strange nighttime quiet where every distant footstep sounded important. Emily stood at the cafeteria coffee machine, watching something dark and bitter pour into a paper cup. That stuff should require a warning label. Ryan's voice came from behind her. Emily glanced over her shoulder. Your mother is stable. I'm feeling reckless. He almost smiled. They took a small table near the window. Outside, the parking lot glistened beneath cold white lights. For a while, neither spoke. Ryan turned his cup slowly between his palms. You said you almost stopped answering Mom after the divorce. Emily looked down. More than once. Because of me? Because I didn't know what the rules were anymore. Ryan frowned. Rules? Your mother called me every Sunday for 11 years. Your father sent me terrible jokes. Luke asked me for advice whenever he didn't want yours. A faint smile crossed her face. Then suddenly, I wasn't your wife. I kept wondering whether loving them meant I wasn't letting you go. Ryan absorbed that quietly. Did you think I wanted you to stop seeing them? I didn't know what you wanted. Emily lifted her eyes. That was part of our problem even before the divorce. The sentence settled between them without accusation. Ryan looked toward the window. Years ago, he might have defended himself. Tonight, exhaustion left little energy for armor. I still see your dad. Emily's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. What? Once a month. Sometimes twice. She stared at him. My dad. Usually Saturday mornings. Doing what? Mostly pretending to fish. Emily blinked. You hate fishing. I know. He knows you hate fishing. He definitely knows. Despite herself, Emily laughed. Ryan did too, softly. Then her expression changed. Why didn't you tell me? Ryan leaned back. What was I supposed to say? Hi, Emily. Just so you know, your father still likes me? She recognized her own words from earlier and shook her head. Okay, fair. The silence that followed felt different. Less like a wall, more like a room neither had entered before. Emily traced the seam of her cup. I thought you'd want a clean break. So did I. Ryan looked at her. I thought that meant everything connected to us had to separate too. And did it? He gave a small, tired laugh. Apparently our parents missed the memo. Emily smiled, then looked toward the hallway leading back to Margaret's room. Your mother once told me she wasn't going to erase 11 years because two people signed a document. Sounds like her. I thought she was being stubborn. She was. Ryan paused. Doesn't mean she was wrong. Emily met his eyes. For the first time in years, Ryan wasn't looking at her like an ex-wife whose presence complicated his life. He was looking at someone who had lost pieces of the same world he had. Maybe we made this harder than it needed to be, he said. Emily considered that. Maybe we were trying so hard to divide everything that we forgot some things weren't ours to divide. A nurse entered the cafeteria and called Ryan's name. Margaret was awake and asking for them. Ryan stood, then waited for Emily instead of walking ahead. She rose beside him. They headed down the corridor together, not touching, not reconciled, not pretending the past had disappeared. But for the first time since their marriage ended, neither was trying to outrun it. And neither of them knew that the next invitation waiting for Emily would force them to decide whether they could finally share the same room without treating each other like a mistake. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, and Emily knew whose wedding it was before she opened the envelope. The handwriting belonged to Luke. Not printed calligraphy, not a wedding planner's careful script. His handwriting, slanted, impatient, unmistakable. Emily stood beside her desk with the envelope between her fingers. Inside was a cream invitation embossed with two names, Luke Carter and Hannah Brooks. Beneath it rested a smaller card. Emily smiled before she could stop herself. Luke was finally marrying the woman he had called just a friend for nearly 4 years. Then she saw the handwritten line at the bottom. Please come. It won't feel right without you. Her smile faded. The wedding would be at the Carter family's lakeside property in Connecticut. The same place where Emily had spent summers with Ryan. The same lawn where Luke had graduated from college. The same dock where Ryan once proposed to her beneath strings of cheap white lights because the expensive restaurant he had booked lost power during a storm. Too many memories occupied that place. And Ryan would occupy it too. Emily placed the invitation on her desk. That evening, she typed a message to Luke. I love you. I'm so happy for you. I think it might be easier for everyone if I don't come. She stared at the words for several minutes before pressing send. Luke didn't reply. The next morning, Emily's assistant appeared at her office door. There's a man here who says he's your brother. Emily frowned. I don't have a brother. Luke stepped around the corner carrying 2 coffees. That's rude. Emily closed her eyes. Luke. Emily. He placed 1 coffee on her desk and sat down without being invited. You drove 2 hours because I declined a wedding invitation? 90 minutes. I speed. Not helping. Luke leaned forward. Why aren't you coming? Emily looked at the invitation. You know why. Ryan. She said nothing. He knows you were invited. And he's still coming. Emily folded her arms. Good. He's your brother. Luke's expression changed. And what are you? That caught her. Luke, you were there when I got rejected from Northwestern. You helped me move into my first apartment. You sat with me in the emergency room when I broke my wrist because Ryan was in Chicago. Emily looked away. That was different. Why? Because I was married to your brother. Luke shook his head. No, you were my sister. The room went quiet. Outside the windows, Manhattan moved beneath a pale morning sky. Luke reached across the desk and tapped the invitation. You didn't divorce me. Emily's throat tightened. I'm not asking you and Ryan to dance together. I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened. I'm asking you to be there when I get married. Emily looked at the man she had first met when he was 19, all messy hair and sarcastic jokes. Somewhere during 11 years, he had become family without asking permission. Just like Margaret. Just like Thomas. What if it's awkward? She asked. Luke smiled. It will absolutely be awkward. A laugh escaped her. Terrible sales pitch. But you'll survive. Emily looked once more at the invitation. Then she picked up a pen. Fine. Luke grinned. Fine means yes. Fine means you owe me. Anything. Emily wrote her name on the RSVP card. She didn't know that across town, Ryan had already received his own invitation. She didn't know Luke had seated them only a few places apart. And she certainly didn't know that somewhere inside the wedding slideshow was a photograph no one had remembered to remove. The most dangerous thing at Luke Carter's wedding wasn't seeing Ryan again. It was realizing that, for one evening, neither of them had anywhere else to go. Emily arrived at the lakeside property just before sunset. White chairs lined the lawn beneath strings of warm lights, and beyond them the water reflected a sky turning slowly from gold to violet. She had barely stepped from her car when Margaret appeared. You came. The older woman hugged her before Emily could answer. Of course I came. Margaret pulled back and studied her navy blue dress. Beautiful. Then her eyes moved over Emily's shoulder. Emily didn't need to turn around. She knew. Ryan stood near the terrace in a dark suit, one hand in his pocket, talking with Thomas. 3 years ago, Emily could have identified his silhouette from across a crowded station. Apparently, some knowledge survived longer than marriage. Ryan looked up. Their eyes met. This time, neither looked away immediately. He gave a small nod. Emily returned it. That was all. The ceremony began beneath an arch covered in white roses. Luke cried before Hannah did, which everyone would later deny for him. Emily laughed softly when Margaret reached across the aisle for a tissue. Ryan saw her. She saw him seeing her. But the moment passed without wait. At the reception, Emily discovered Luke had kept his promise. Technically, she wasn't seated beside Ryan. There were exactly 3 chairs between them. Coward, she whispered when Luke passed behind her. Strategist, he corrected. Dinner went surprisingly well until Aunt Patricia leaned across the table. You know, I always thought you two would work it out. Silence arrived instantly. Someone became intensely interested in buttering a dinner roll. Emily lifted her wine. Ryan stared at his plate. Patricia, Margaret warned. What? I'm just saying, don't. Ryan's voice was calm, but final. Emily looked at him. He didn't appear embarrassed for himself. He appeared irritated on her behalf. Patricia retreated. Fine. Nobody can say anything anymore. Conversation slowly resumed. Later, the lights dimmed for the family slideshow. Childhood photographs appeared across a large screen. Luke missing his front teeth, Luke at graduation, Luke asleep beside a birthday cake. Laughter filled the room. Then the photograph changed. Emily stopped breathing. Ryan did too. It was from their wedding. Luke stood between them at 19, grinning beneath a crooked bow tie. Emily wore white. Ryan's arms circled her waist. They were looking at each other instead of the camera. The room went painfully quiet. Luke turned toward the screen, horrified. Oh God. Hannah touched his arm. I forgot that was in there. Luke looked at Emily. I'm sorry. Every face seemed to wait for her reaction. Emily studied the photograph. Once, seeing it would have felt like reopening something stitched shut. Tonight, she saw two younger people who had loved each other sincerely and still somehow failed. The memory hurt, but it no longer accused her. Emily smiled at Luke. It's okay. Across the table, Ryan looked at her. Something in his expression softened. The slideshow continued. Nobody mentioned the photograph again. But later, when Emily stepped onto the terrace for air, she heard the door open behind her. Ryan stopped beside the railing, leaving a respectful distance between them. For several seconds, they watched moonlight move across the lake. You really meant that? He asked. Emily knew exactly what he meant. That it's okay? Yeah. She considered the dark water. I think it finally is. Ryan lowered his eyes. And for the first time, the photograph of their marriage belonged to neither regret nor hope. It was simply something that had been true. Ryan had spent 3 years wondering why his family refused to let Emily go. At his brother's wedding, his mother finally gave him an answer he couldn't argue with. The reception had moved indoors after midnight. Music drifted through the open terrace doors, softer now, while the lake beyond the windows disappeared into darkness. Ryan found Margaret alone near the family photographs, carefully removing her shoes beneath the table. Mom. She looked up. If you're about to tell me to put these back on, remember I gave birth to you. Ryan almost smiled. That wasn't it. He sat beside her. Across the room, Emily was helping Hannah gather cards from the gift table. She laughed at something Luke said. Margaret followed Ryan's gaze. Oh, don't. I didn't say anything. You were about to. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. Ryan remained quiet for a moment. Why did you keep inviting her? Margaret's expression changed. Emily, after the divorce. Thanksgiving. Birthdays. Your anniversary. Everything. You're asking me this now. I'm asking because I think I finally want the real answer. Margaret studied her son. Did you think I was trying to get you back together? Ryan didn't respond. Good Lord. She shook her head. Ryan, if I wanted to interfere in your marriage, I had 11 years to do it. Then why? Margaret looked across the room at Emily. Because you divorced her. Ryan frowned. That's exactly why I'm asking. No, that's exactly the answer. Margaret turned toward him. You divorced Emily. I didn't stop loving her. The words were simple. No dramatic pause. No accusation. Somehow that made them heavier. Ryan looked down. Margaret continued. She was 24 when you brought her into our house. I watched her become a woman at my kitchen table. She stayed with me when your father had surgery. She remembered my mother's birthday after my mother was gone. She helped Luke through college. What did you expect me to do when you signed those papers? Forget all of it. Ryan rubbed his thumb along the edge of his glass. I thought keeping her around made it harder for everyone. Harder for you. He looked at her. Margaret's voice softened. Your pain was real, Ryan. So was hers. But neither of you had the right to decide whom the rest of us were allowed to love. Across the room, Susan Whitmore approached Emily and kissed her cheek before moving toward Daniel. Ryan watched his former father-in-law help Thomas with his jacket. Her parents still invite me fishing, he said quietly. Exactly. Margaret slipped her shoes into her hand and stood. Families are inconvenient. You should know that by now. She kissed Ryan's forehead and walked away. Minutes later, Ryan found Emily outside on the terrace. The music behind them had faded to a distant rhythm. Emily. She turned. Everything okay? Yeah. Ryan stepped beside the railing. I owe you an apology. She waited. After the divorce, I acted like the cleanest way forward was for you to disappear from everything connected to me. Emily's expression remained still. I never said it directly. Maybe that made it worse. Ryan, let me finish. He exhaled. You shouldn't have had to lose people you loved just to make my life less uncomfortable. Emily looked toward the lake. For a long moment, she said nothing. Thank you. Ryan nodded. I'm sorry it took me 3 years. Her eyes returned to his. Some things take longer when you're trying not to look at them. A faint smile touched his face. You always did that. So did you. This time, neither sentence carried a blade. Behind them, their families laughed inside the warm house. Ryan glanced through the glass, then back at Emily. For the first time, he understood that accepting her place in his family did not mean reclaiming her as his wife. It meant finally respecting the life she had built inside those relationships. And standing beside him beneath the quiet wedding lights, Emily realized something too. Forgiveness did not restore the past. It simply stopped requiring someone to pay for it. A year later, Emily walked into Thanksgiving dinner and realized nobody had asked whether Ryan would be there. Snow had begun falling just before sunset, dusting the Carter house in white and turning the windows gold against the November dark. Emily stood on the porch holding Susan's sweet potato casserole, suddenly remembering all the years when she would have called Margaret first. Is Ryan coming? What time should I arrive? Should I leave before dessert? Tonight, she had asked none of those questions. Margaret opened the door. You're late. By 4 minutes. Still late. She took the casserole and kissed Emily's cheek. From inside came laughter, football commentary, and Thomas arguing with Daniel about something neither man understood well enough to argue about. Emily removed her coat. Then she saw the dining table. 2 empty chairs sat beside each other near the far end. She almost laughed. Margaret, what? Margaret disappeared toward the kitchen with suspicious innocence. Emily chose one of the chairs. She was pouring water when the front door opened again. Ryan's voice drifted down the hallway. Sorry. Traffic. Emily's hand didn't stop. That surprised her. A moment later, Ryan entered carrying 2 bottles of wine. He saw her. His steps slowed. Hey. Hey. No silence swallowed the room. No one suddenly studied the ceiling. Thomas simply called from the living room. Ryan, tell Daniel he's wrong. About what? Doesn't matter. Ryan laughed and set down the wine. Then he noticed the empty chair beside Emily. His eyes moved toward Margaret in the kitchen. She refused to look at him. Ryan pulled out the chair. Is this taken? Emily looked at him for a moment. A year earlier, the question would have carried history, suspicion, maybe fear. Tonight, it was only a chair. Almost. Not yet. Ryan sat. Dinner unfolded without catastrophe. Luke and Hannah announced they were buying a house. Susan complained about Daniel's new obsession with woodworking. Margaret served too much food. When Emily reached for the gravy, Ryan passed it before she asked. She accepted it without freezing. Later, someone told a story about a disastrous vacation Emily and Ryan had taken during their marriage. Everyone laughed. Emily did too. So did Ryan. The memory belonged to the room now, not to a wound. After dessert, Emily stepped onto the porch with coffee. Snow fell softly beneath the streetlights. The door opened behind her. Ryan came out and leaned against the railing. You know what's strange? He asked. That your father ate 3 pieces of pie? 4. Emily smiled. Then yes. Ryan looked through the window at both families crowded around the same table. This used to feel impossible. Emily followed his gaze. Margaret was laughing beside Susan. Thomas had fallen asleep in his chair, while Daniel continued talking to him anyway. Luke was showing Hannah something on his phone. We kept thinking someone had to leave, Emily said, so everyone else could stay. Ryan nodded. Turns out nobody did. They stood quietly. His hand rested on the railing a few inches from hers. Neither moved closer. Neither moved away. There was no apology left to demand, no reunion to announce, no promise that love would return simply because anger had gone. What existed between them was smaller and perhaps more difficult. Peace. Inside, Margaret opened the door. If you two are finished being dramatic in the snow, I need help with dishes. Emily laughed. Ryan shook his head. They went inside together. Their marriage had ended. Their family hadn't. And somewhere between learning how to let go and learning what was worth keeping, Emily and Ryan finally stopped treating each other like something that had to be lost.